Hello. Okay, so moving on from the first part where we placed all of our joints and oriented them correctly, we're going to now move on to skinning our character. Okay, so to get started, I'm going to select the root joint of my skeleton, which will be the first joint in the hierarchy, and I'm going to shift select my mesh. Once I've done that, I'm going to come up to my drop down menu, go to rigging, and then go skin, bind skin, option box, and I'm pretty much going to leave all of these settings as default. So I'm just going to reset settings. One thing I will turn off is I'm going to turn off maintain max influences. And everything else I'm going to leave as is. So in terms of what all these things are, the joint hierarchy is what we're binding to. And this just means that I only have to select the root joint, and all children of that joint will be bound into the skin cluster that we create. The bind method is just how it searches for vertices to assign to joints. The skinning method is the algorithm used by the skin cluster for how the joints are controlled by the joints, and then other options in here. So we also have a section down here that's max influences, and this just denotes how many joints can control any single vertice on the initial bind, so to speak. But anyway, we're going to leave the rest of these settings as is, and we're going to apply. Now this is not going to leave us with amazing skin weights, and we're going to have to go in and do some painting, but that's okay. So I'll move this arm, and we see that some weird things happen down here. So we can solve that in a second. Now I'm also going to select my nails and select my root joint and my nails, and then I'm going to bind those as well, just with the same settings. Bind. And now when I move my arm, the nail should move along with it. Now they have a separate skin cluster now, so I will have to copy their weights later once I do editing on the hands. So for now, I'm just going to hide that mesh. It's like just focus on this one, and then later on, I'll go and copy the skin weights from my hand over to my nails. Okay, so from here, we need to now go start addressing our skin weights. So one of the easiest ways to get into the skin weighting tool is to, once you have a skin cluster on a mesh, you can right click and hold on the mesh and go skin weights tool, and we'll bring up this window here. And this window will basically let us go through and start assigning vertices to selected joints. Now when you use this tool normally for other reasons, like potentially if you're painting the weights of a deformer, or you're painting the weights for other things, generally you're just assigning a value 0 to 1 on any given vertex. This operation slightly differs in the fact that we all vertices have assigned weights to all the joints, and when we're adding weight to one vertice, we'll be taking away weight from another joint's control over that vertice. And as such, there's a little bit of a slight ethos change on how we actually go about using the paint operation tools. So you can use all of these features in here, but generally we're going to add, and then we're going to attempt to only add influence to any given joint. And when we run into problem areas that have influence from another joint that we don't want, we're going to solve that by taking away by adding somewhere else, as opposed to going to replace, setting that value to 0 and taking away. Now the reason for this is if we subtract weight, we don't get any say over where that weight goes. So instead of subtracting that weight, 9 times out of 10 we're going to be trying to add the weight somewhere else so that we have control over where the weight is distributed to. Okay, so super quick rundown of this tool, just the quick basics. These are all our joints in here. You have a little lock here so you can lock them once you're happy with them. It is advisable to not lock them most of the time unless you're well away from the area that you are working, for the reason that if you, let's say I was to lock the root joint and then start painting on the hips, you would paint here and it would look like weight was being added and smoothed in between this joint and this joint. But if this joint is locked, then it won't receive any weight changes at all, and you'll sort of be deceived a little bit because it will look like it's putting weight there, but then as soon as you toggle to a different joint and go back, the weight will have like reverted to what it was, because it can't add anything to a locked joint. So you can lock your joints, but generally lock quite far away from where you're currently working. So if I was like working on the head and I'd like weight painted all the head and I was happy with everything up there, then potentially, yeah, maybe I could lock a lot of these joints if I know that I don't want any influence going back to that area. And this is a sort of like this can be a pretty like sort of brute force methodical way of ensuring that weights aren't being sent to places that they shouldn't be. Some workflows would basically lock all the things, and then you'd only unlock the joints where you definitely want weight to be dispersed to, hence ensuring that no errant weights get sent to a joint well down the hierarchy where the weight shouldn't be. We're not going to worry about that for the time being. Most of the time Maya actually does a relatively good job at sort of auto distributing weights. Okay, so these are our joints and we can lock them. Then we've got paint and select mode that we can use in here, so we can select vertices or we can paint the weights. We have replace, which will let us replace the value on a vertice. So let's say the vertice had a value of 1 by default. We could go replace and set the value to 0.5, and it would replace that 1 with a 0.5 and automatically distribute the remaining 0.5 somewhere else in the chain. Then we have add, which will just let you only add to a joint. And then we have smooth, which will let you smooth stuff. And then there's scale here, which lets you scale up the value in a given area. I don't think I've ever used this when weight painting, but nonetheless it's an option that's there. I'm sure there are probably some workflows that utilize it. The next thing down here, we have different profiles for the brush. This is basically like a super soft brush, sort of soft brush, hard brush, square brush, and then you can have you can pull in a custom image for your brush. It's almost like an alpha. Then the rest of this stuff down here, we're leaving this alone, and these two sections here are important to us. So we have brush opacity and brush value. So these differ in the value is the raw number that's actually being applied to the vertice on any given stroke, and the opacity is how much you're letting the brush apply that, if that makes sense. So this is the important number, but then this is basically a mask on top of that that lets you dampen the amount of control the brush has. And then the other button that we have down here is called flood. This can be really handy when we're smoothing stuff out, but this will basically just flood the whole model or the selection with whatever operation that you have in here. This can be handy for a few weights. I often use this almost as a hammer weights option to basically force a bunch of weights to adhere to one joint or another. And we also have down here in the geometry color section, we have a color ramp, and we can turn that on, and that will basically show a color ramp instead of the black and white ramp. I generally don't prefer to use this. Some people do, because it does tend to show small errant weights as like a blue color, which can be a little bit easier to see than an errant weight up here that might be almost black. I tend not to use this, as I just use prune weights instead, which tends to get rid of all those small errant weights. And we'll cover prune weights in a little bit. And that's essentially it for this tool. So from here, what I'm going to do is you can go through the the areas and start addressing some of your skin weights. So there is a mirror feature in skin weights if your character has symmetry, and so I can start painting on one side of my model and mirror to the other. It is worth checking in your skin weights what side is set up to be the mirrored side. So my character is facing down the z-axis and standing up on the y, which means that the mirror plane that I'm working on is the YZ plane, and the direction of mirroring is happening positive to negative. So the x positive is on this side and the x negative is on that side. So I'm saying with this ticked on, I'm going to paint the positive and I'm going to mirror that to the negative. And then the rest of the settings we can leave as is. Okay, so yeah, to get started, we can essentially, I'm going to go into the leg area here and with add, and I noted that I had a problem here before where the hand was pulling this weight. So my first goal is essentially going to be to just block in 100% weight on that leg area where that problem was. And yeah, generally I'm going to say I want all of this weight to belong to the leg joint. Now go down to the next one. This is my lower leg joint. Same again, I want all of this weight to belong to here, even if it doesn't look like you're painting. Sometimes I'll just paint it anyway, and we'll go and smooth all this data out in a little bit, but just generally I just want to block in as best I can all the weights that belong to any given area. Hold in B and click and drag, that will change the size of your brush. And paint, 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 paint. Now there are some other ways that we can sort of work with this as well. So if we have nice naming, so here for example we can see there's some errant weight at the back of the heel here. I could go to the ankle joint and I can force that to go to there. Excuse-moi. Okay. So one other thing we can do, if we come up to the section up here, if this isn't here, you can click on the little arrow thing here and it'll open that out. And this is basically your like masking features. So by default, if all of these are turned on, then they are selectable. But all of these correspond to a different thing. So these are selection handles, joints, curves, geometry, components, so on and so forth. So in this case, I'm going to actually mask my joints. So I turn that off, and now I can't select joints in my scene. This is good because now I can come in here, I can grab a selection of vertices. If you want to, you can use the tool down here, which is like a lasso tool. And on here, I can sit there and go, okay, well, I want to paint weights on these now. So right click and hold, go paint weights. And now I have a selection inside my paint weights tool. And the beautiful thing about this is this allows me to paint weights only affecting these vertices. So I can come into here and go upper foot, and I want all of these to be 100% controlled by the upper foot. So if I set my thing to add and go opacity 1 and value 1 and flood that, that will flood every vertex in that selection with a value of 1 for this particular joint. And then essentially you can sort of go through and you can do that across the character. It's a really handy way of being able to sort of like work on specific sections at a time, knowing that you're not going to be throwing errant values outside of this selection set, which can be really handy. Okay, so I've done that. I'm going to come back, select my skin weights, and I'm going to go through and flood some smooth into all of them. So I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Coming down to my lower leg, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ankle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe. To my foot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. And then the lower foot joint should have absolutely nothing. And we can test that in a little bit. So now that I've done that, I'm going to unmask my joints. I'm going to come in and have a look and see what we're getting. So now we can see I'm not seeing any vertices outside of this area being affected when I'm rotating. Come to my knee joint. Now there are some errant values here that are connected to the leg. You can see that my some points are moving forward here, which means that there's values connected somewhere that they shouldn't be there. So we can go and address that. So again, I'm going to mask my joints super quickly, come into my vertices. I'm going to grab that chunk of area where I had an issue, and I'm going to come up to a tool up here, Windows, General Editors, Component Editor. And this tool is really handy for showing you all of the values that you have on your smooth skins. So smooth skin tab, and what this is going to show me is it's going to show me basically a graph. The down axis of the graph is showing me every single vertice that I have in my selection, and then the across axis of the graph shows me all of the joints that have influence over those vertices. So in here I can go through and I can obliterate anything that shouldn't be part of this selection. So this is the left leg of my character. So we can open some of these up if you need to, so you can actually see them. Having short, contracted names for your joints is very good, especially when you're using some of the tools in Maya, like Component Editor, for example. Having too long a name sometimes will make seeing all the things a little bit more difficult. Okay, so this is my left leg, so I can go through here and I can obliterate anything that shouldn't be connected. So my right leg should have no influence over this area at all. So I can scroll down all the way to the bottom, shift click on the bottom one, 0, and that will remove that from the influence and automatically distribute whatever was taken away to the remaining joints. So the right lower leg should also have no influence over this area. And there we go. So now, if I close that down, go back to my object mode, unmask my joints. Now when I rotate my knee, I'm not getting that same problem anymore. Now there's still lots of weight painting to do on this, but for now I'm just trying to solve all my errant weights. So once I've done that, I'm going to select this mesh, and again, just remember when you're utilizing the mirror feature, always work on just the one side of the model. So in this case, I'm working on the positive side, and that's denoted down here by the direction that the red arrow is facing. That points to positive, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to mirror the skin weights on this now. Mirror skin weights. And now when I select my other leg, it too should have the same skin weighting data. Okay. Now we can come to the arms and we can solve some other areas. So here we have some small weights that are being pulled along for the ride. So what I'm going to try here is I'm going to try and use a feature called prune small weights. Now this might not get everything, but pruning small weights basically goes over every vertice and looks for any vertice that has a value determined by you, and prunes it and sets it to 0, and then automatically distributes it to the next nearest joint. So I'm going to come to skin, prune small weights, and a lot of those weights ended up pruning back. Some didn't because their value is probably a little bit over, and that's okay. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to come down here, come to vertex, I'm going to select my entire leg area, and again I'm going to come back into my component editor, and there'll be a lot of joints in this tab here. But one thing that I know for this joint selection here is that nothing from the arm, the clavicle, the arm, the elbow, or the upper arm, lower arm, or any of the fingers should have any influence over this area. And so I can obliterate those from the columns. So none of my pinkies, pointers, thumbs, hands, whoop, hands, all of those, and then I scroll down to the bottom, and then shift click on the bottom one, and I should just double check the list to make sure I'm not accidentally taking it away from something that should be there. 0 and enter. And that has taken all of those out of the skin weights. So now, if I come back to my arm, whoop, 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 object mode, unmask my joints, come back to this here, I'm going to set this one's rotation to thingy. And now, nothing from the leg is moving when I move the arm, because all of these influences I've taken away from here using the component editor. Once I've done that, set that to 0, and again, grab my skin, mirror skin weights. And that will ensure that the same is happening on the other side. Okay, so from here, we can do the same thing again when it comes to this next part. This next part will require a little bit of hand painting, however. Some of these values we will want to have the arm to have access to, so we're going to hand do this part. So in this case, I'm going to select this part of the mesh, right click and hold, paint skin weights. I'm going to navigate down to my arm. So this is my left arm, so left upper arm, and in this area here we have left upper arm, we have clavicle, and then we have spine joints, A, B, and C, or A, B, and C. Now in this case, a lot of this weight here I want connected to my spine, my torso spine joint, with the torso being the last spine joint in my chain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that joint, I'm going to come to add, and I'm going to set my values on both opacity and value down to something a little lower so that I can build this in slowly. I've got my arm rotated out so that I can see the vertices moving back to their initial bind pose. And bind pose just is a term for the position the vertices were first in when the skin cluster or deformer was first applied to the model. So by having the arm rotated out, this is putting all of these vertices out of bind pose, so to speak, so that when I come in here and I assign weight with add, I'll be able to see it travel back to where it should have been. And I'm going to just very softly assign these weights back. Like so. Sometimes you might want a smaller brush. And don't worry too much if it's not super clean as you're brushing it. Just get the general silhouette back to the shape that it should be. And then we can use the smooth feature to smooth out some of those weights. And I'll often go back through here with a heavier smooth pass, and I'll flood smooth across these areas here, because this joint should have some influence, so I'm going to smooth some of that out. The clavicle should have some influence, so I'm going to smooth some of that out. And then, of course, the upper arm should have some influence, so again, I'll smooth some of that out. Generally, just smoothing all of the joints related to this area. And keep an eye on your topology. And now, sometimes you may find that some of these points may have value coming from somewhere else, and that can make it difficult to work with sometimes. You might be sitting there thinking, well, I've smoothed out all the things in this area, but it's still a little jagged. So what we can do in that case is we can, again, use our component editor to just double check that everything in this area is being controlled by what we think it should be controlled by. So again, I'm going to grab my my lasso tool, just mask out my joints. I'm just going to generally grab this area of vertices. Just grabs everything around to the back area there. I'm going to control select some of this stuff at the back because some of that stuff is fine. And now I'm going to pull up my component editor again. So here we go. Here's my component editor, and we can come in here and have a look and see. So for these vertices here, let's have a look and see what things are being controlled here. So we have our spine. Most of our spine things probably should have weight over this area. The root joint, maybe. The neck joint, probably not. The left arm, yes. The lower arm, no. So I'm going to obliterate from the lower arm. And then I'm going to, the upper arm is okay. The neck joint, I don't want any control from the neck joint on this selection. So I'm going to zero those out. I don't really want the root joint to have any control over this area. So again, I'll zero that out. And then what we're left with is all the things that should probably have control over this area. And I'll close that down. Unmask my joints. Come back to my skin weights. And spine D here has a little weight. There's nothing on neck now. Clavicle. And I'm going to just slowly add back with a really small brush some of these points in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my tool to smooth. I'm going to flood smooth a few times through every joint in this area. And we can come and give it a test out. So still pulling quite a bit of weight from over this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into here with the arm in that pose, and I'm just, for the time being, going to obliterate all of the arm values from this little area here. Now, we'll probably end up putting some of them back, but just for the time being, we're going to just erase them. So this will be their left upper arm. So this selection here, so all of the left lower arm and left upper arm will have nothing. And I'm going to deselect that, come back to my arm, rotate that. Now that's doing more what I want. There's still some errant weights down here, so again, I just come and grab those vertices. Use my lasso tool. And again, I'm going to add this to my shelf by holding Control Shift and clicking on it. Just going to put it over here so I can get quick access to it. And again, I don't want the upper arm having any control over this area, so I'm going to obliterate that value. There we go. And that's better. Now, once I've done that, I'm going to rotate that arm out, come into my paint weights tool, and on that joint, I'm going to flood a little bit of smooth, and again, just through all the joints in this area, a little bit. I'm going to hand brush some of this. Hand brushing will generally give you a little bit more control. So this arm's got some influence over here that it really shouldn't have. So just move that back, and in order to solve that, I'm going to come into my vertex, mask my joints, and I'm going to grab the paintbrush instead here. And this is just going to let me paint in a vertex selection like so, and I can sit there relatively confidently on this selection here, component editor, and again just remove the upper arm from that spot. There we go, it'll automatically redistribute. So now that area is mostly solved, and we've got to just clean up a little bit of the smoothness in that area. So again, on that arm there, come in with a smooth brush, smooth these out so that looks relatively clean and nice. And we can come and give that a test. Unmask my joints. And now that's looking all right. Now there's a lot of weight on the shoulder here that I'd probably like to go and solve. I'd like to give a little bit more influence back to the clavicle so the arm isn't affecting the clavicle joint quite as much. But for the most part, this is starting to come together and starting to do the things that we want. Okay, so from here we'll just sort of carry on. So I'm going to come in here to my clavicle. I'm going to add a good bit more weight back to the clavicle area. And then once I've done that, flood a bit of smooth through it. I generally will flood a little bit of smooth through each of these areas as I do them. I find it helps a little bit. Helps keep the values nice and clean. And again, anytime I do a little section, I'll then come and grab a joint, rotate it, and see how I feel, like how it's working. So there's still some float weights going up here. Again, I can go and obliterate those with my component editor. Now this is doing alright. It is moving a little bit down here where I don't want it to. So again, same deal, I can obliterate that. But for the most part, this is doing sort of what I'd want it to do. Okay, so we'll go through and do some of those bits in a second, but just for now, we're going to cut this video short in just a bit. But just before we cut it short, we'll quickly get the jaw area done, so I can show you some interesting ways to do some more of the difficult areas. The mouth in particular is an area that can be quite difficult for newcomers. So there's a space in the whole of the mouth here, and we essentially need to paint weight from the bottom half of the mouth to the jaw controller, and then paint weight from the top half of the mouth to the head joint. So a nice quick way of doing that is we can use vertices selections. So I'm going to select a series of joints through the mouth area here, approximately like so. So you might pull it back one, there, and let's say there. And then I'm going to press Shift and the bracket key next to question mark. And that's going to grow my selection. I'm going to grow that selection all the way back to the corners of the mouth. And then from there, I can come to my skin weights tool. I can navigate down to my jaw joint, which will be my jaw. I'm going to put it on my jaw A joint, I suppose. And I'll put it on jaw B and make it a bit simpler. I'm going to flood this with a value of 1. I'm then going to come to my head B joint, which is the end effector joint for my head. And we're going to assign the same thing again, but to the head joints. So on the top this time, I'm going to grow that selection until I get to the corner of the mouth. Skin weights tool. I'm on my head joint, and I'm going to flood that. Once I've flooded that, I can then come back into my skin weights tool, and it's relatively easy now to go in and paint that data everywhere else. So I want to be careful not to get anything down here, but for the most part, everything above, I can then go and paint to the head joint. Now again, symmetry is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So I just need to focus on getting 1/2 of this sorted. I'll leave these values close to the neck alone, and we can address those separately. And there we go, so that's most of those weights sorted. And from here, I'm going to come to smooth, I'm going to flood, and then come down to my jaw B joint, and I'm going to flood. And now I'm going to mirror these weights on my character. Skin, mirror skin weights. And let's have a look and see the result. Now this is looking okay. If I select my jaw joint and rotate it open, the mouth is opening. Now there are still some things we have to solve here. So there are some weights being pulled from the nose. So what I can do here is I can grab a point on the nose and grow that selection quite a lot. And we can come back to our skin weights tool, and we can hammer those to the head. So come to head B, add, flood. And now when I rotate this, nothing from the nose is moving. And yeah, so now there's some weights around the neck that we need to solve, but we can come back in and we can hand paint those. So come back to here, we come to this, come down to that jaw B joint, and potentially on neck C, we might give some weight now to neck C in this area. So there's neck C. Neck B gets a bit of that weight, and then neck A gets a little bit of the initial starting weights down here. And again, I'll come through with a quick flood, and I'll flood. We can have a look and see how that looking. So still moving a little bit too much of this, so I'll need to go back and add some more of that, more weight to that area. But for now, this will sort of conclude part 1, and then we'll come back in another part and we'll sort of continue on. All right, thanks for watching.